Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
What's up, guys? Welcome to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. I'm so excited to welcome our guest today, Aric Almirola. He is a NASCAR Cup Series driver driving the number 10 car with Stewart-Haas Racing. And we got the Daytona 500 coming up on Sunday, February 14th. And Aric is a really great dude. We spent some time before and after the interview talking as well. And he's got a great story, a great testimony, and a great heart for people. And he's doing some good things on the track, too. And I'm excited to watch him in 2021 and excited for you guys to hear his story here today on the show. Before we get to Aric and our conversation with him, I want to thank a few of our friends. First of all, we want to thank you, our listeners. You guys are our friends. And so much of what we do here at Sports Spectrum comes from you guys, not just building an audience and having you check out this show every time, but really providing feedback. My email address is jason@sportspectrum.com, and that's an email that comes directly to me. And a lot of you guys have suggested guests and stories and topics and things that we can help implement into our content at Sports Spectrum, specifically with this podcast. So thank you to you, the listener. And again, if you have an idea for a guest, somebody you want to hear us talk to in 2021, coming up on our fourth year with the Sports Spectrum podcast, you can email me, jason@sportspectrum.com. And also make sure you check out our website, sportspectrum.com, with all of the content, including a daily devotional every day at 6 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday, to start your day right with the Lord, right there at sportspectrum.com. We also want to thank our partners and sponsors here at Sports Spectrum, Ronald Blue Trust. Their advisors applying biblical wisdom and technical expertise to help their clients make wise financial decisions to experience clarity and confidence and leave a lasting legacy. It's still early here in 2021. A lot of us have questions regarding our finances. What do we do with charitable giving in the middle of a pandemic? What's it look like to pay our bills and financial retirement and estate planning? Lots of questions. Ronald Blue Trust has the answers. Check them out at ronblue.com. ronblue.com. All of your financial questions and answers and concerns with Ronald Blue Trust. ronblue.com. We're also presented today by our new sponsors, Convoy of Hope, a faith-based nonprofit organization with a driving passion to feed the world through children's feeding initiatives, community outreaches, and disaster responses. And right now, they need you to join their starting lineup with their favorite players and teams in partnering with Convoy of Hope to fight hunger, poverty, and suffering in the United States and throughout the world. Check out their website, convoynation.com, to learn more and be a part of a great organization and the great work that Convoy of Hope is doing. convoynation.com. As I said, Aric Almirola is our guest here today on Sports Spectrum. This is an interview I'm really excited about because we haven't had a ton of NASCAR drivers on, and I've been wanting to do more NASCAR on this show, and Aric is the perfect guest to talk to as the Daytona 500 kicks off on Sunday, February 14th. Aric has raced in a bunch of those Daytona 500s, actually finished fourth in 2017, and he began racing nationally at the age of just 14 years old. He's 36 years old now. He made his NASCAR debut in the NASCAR Sunbelt Weekly Racing Division back in 2002 and finished second in the Rookie of the Year standings. He's one of the first drivers to participate in NASCAR's Drive for Diversity program. He's driven in the Truck Series, the Xfinity Series, and of course now the Cup Series. He finished fifth in the Cup Series in 2018. That's his best finish, and he had his first career win at the 2014 Coke Zero 400 in the Sprint Cup Series. This is a great conversation with Aric Almirola. He's got a really cool testimony as well. Somebody who went to church but didn't really understand or have that relationship, that deep relationship with Jesus. So Aric Almirola is our guest today, and he's got a wonderful story. Take a listen to Aric joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. Aric, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Jason.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you, Aric. Let's start, because I've always wondered, we've had a lot of drivers on, but I don't think we've had them on in the off-season or leading right up to when the season starts. And I'm curious what an off-season looks like for a NASCAR driver, because a lot of these guys, you'll race up until November, and then you got
Right.
December, January, and then it's turning around right away with the Daytona 500. So there's not this like 6-month off season. It's really just a couple of months, maybe just 8 weeks or so. What does training look like? What does an off season look like for you, Aric?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I would say in all of sports, and yes, I do consider what we do a sport, even though I know a lot of people don't. But I would say in all of sports, we have the longest schedule by far. We start usually the first week of February, and we go all the way to the week before Thanksgiving in November. So it's a long, grueling schedule. And so because of that, obviously the off season is very short. And so for me, everybody's a little bit different, but for me, I've got a wife and 2 little kids, an 8 and a 7-year-old. So, the holidays are very special, and I devote basically from Thanksgiving to Christmas to really being dad and husband. And we do a little bit of traveling, but for the most part, we stay home, and really just rest and recover. And then once January starts back up, the training kicks back in. And the month of January for me is really to build my training back up, lifting weights and doing a lot of longer endurance cardio. Because once the season starts, I spend a lot of time just trying to maintain my fitness and not lose it through that 40-week schedule. It's such a long schedule. And, the races are Sundays, and we have a short week usually before we're going back to the racetrack on a Thursday, at least when there's no COVID.
Right.
So, I think because of that, my off season is very short. I have about 4 or 5 weeks to train really, really hard, like this time of year right now. And so as we progress into the season, my training is really about just maintaining. But the holidays are sacred around the Almirola house. I really unplug, try not to do a whole lot of media or just travel in general, unless it's family specific.
Yeah, that makes really a lot of sense. What may surprise people is the amount of physical training that you have to do to drive a car. People will probably be like, well, you just get in the car and you drive. It's not exactly that easy, right? And explain why the physical training is so important for what you do.
Yeah, so most people misunderstand what we do because, they think about driving a car, they think about city driving, or they even think about highway driving. But the best way that I explain it to people, and people kind of go, I kind of get it now, is you're traveling down the interstate at, 70, 75 miles an hour, right? You're on cruise control. It's not very hard to do that. But when you come up to one of the exit ramps that like loop around, that make a circle, leave your car on cruise control at 75 and try and make the exit ramp.
Yeah.
Right? Like immediately just thinking about that, what would you do? You tense up, right? And you think about making the corner, and everything just gets more tense on you. Well, that's what we do for 3 hours. We're trying to go down a straightaway, and then we corner and turn around and go back the other way as fast as we possibly can. So there's a lot of G forces when you're in your car and you're trying to make that exit ramp at 75. Think about all the stuff in your back seat, right? It's going to go flying all over the place. Well, we have to stabilize ourselves. So there's a lot of core muscles involved with just trying to withstand those G forces without flopping all over in the car. And then the caveat to all of that is that it's usually about 140 degrees inside of our race car. The extreme conditions that we go through inside the race car are unlike anything else. It's so hot, we sweat a tremendous amount. So your fluid intake, your hydration, your electrolytes, all of that stuff is very important. But because of the heat and because of the physical activity that we're doing inside the car and the contracting and the tightening of all the muscles, that gets your heart rate up. And so we see heart rates, the drivers see heart rates, and I know specifically for me, I see heart rates that are, equivalent to what I would see if I, run a marathon or if I go on a long, bike ride. So I do a lot of cardio training to make sure that my body is prepared and ready to endure those high heart rates for 3 hours at 140 degree temperature.
Man, that's a lot. And thank you for explaining that, because I think a lot of people will be like, okay, I'll never question what that means, what the kind of workout that you guys have to go through again. Speaking of hopefully what we never have to go through again, 2020 was a year like no other. And obviously it's still kind of continuing here into 2021. And it may be a while before we're really back to whatever normal is going to look like. But for you, can you kind of take us back and describe what this past year was like for you, especially because everything shut down? And that's probably the first time I can remember, I'm 47, when things just shut down in a sport like NASCAR, and you guys had to kind of wait and figure out when you were going to kind of get back started again. I know, talking to a lot of baseball players and basketball players who were kind of in the mode, training, middle of the season, whatever, were getting ready for a season and then having to shut down. That was hard for them, and kind of restarting back up. What was 2020 like for you, I guess, from just the NASCAR perspective first, and then we'll get into everything else?
Yeah, it was strange, to say the least. You know, in all my years in the sport, you know, we've never missed a race or postponed a race because of anything other than rain. Yeah. And usually we make it up the next day. When I got the phone call that our season had been stopped, we were actually traveling to Atlanta for the next race. And so we were on our way to Atlanta and got the phone call, and we literally turned around and came back home. And so we spent a couple weeks at home, here in just north of Charlotte, North Carolina. And after realizing that this was going to linger on more than just a week or two, you know, I knew that when our season started back up, it was probably going to start back up in the summertime, in the heat. And one of the really difficult things for us as drivers, like I've said, is adapting to the heat. We go through the winter months of training, and then we start out the season, you know, in February and March, and those races are cooler. So, you know, outside temperatures in the 50s, 60s degrees. So the internal temp of the car is 120, 125. And I know that doesn't sound like a big difference, but when you get to the summer and it's 140, that 15 degrees is a huge difference. Mm-hmm. It's like comparing 60-degree weather to, you know, 75-degree weather, or 70 to 85. It's a big difference. So for me, I wanted to be prepared for that. So we loaded up our motorhome. We have a motorhome that travels to all the races, and I literally sleep in the motorhome at the racetrack, at all the different events. Well, that wasn't going to the racetrack. So we got in our motorhome and we traveled to South Florida, and it was 85, 90 degrees down there every day. And I went down there and trained for the next month, getting ready for our season to hopefully start back up so that I was adapted to the heat. Then once we got back going in May, we were the first sport to start back up. And it was so awkward to show up to a racetrack that we normally have 70 to 80,000 fans at. And some of the racetracks that we go to, we have 100,000 plus. But I would say on average, we have about 70 to 80,000 fans in the stands. And then we have another probably 15 or 20,000 fans in the infield area, down in the garage and the pit area where we're at. And so to go to the first, you know, handful of races and there be nobody there except just the drivers and the crew members, it was eerie. You know, the silence was just awkward. The energy was nowhere to be found. You know, the fans, when they're cheering or booing or just making noise in general, it creates a buzz and an energy. And to not have that was very awkward.
I can't imagine. And I know, talking to a lot of basketball players and baseball players and even football guys who've been playing with very minimal crowds. There's a few places that have maybe 20,000, but when you have 100,000 seat stadium, 20,000 seems small. What was that like after? It's like post race and even before the race, like when you're meeting fans, I have to assume you have meet and greets and things like that where you're interacting with a lot of fans, and for months and months at an end, there's nobody, right? Yeah. There's no fans at all.
Yeah. It's, you know, for me, I'm a very social person. I enjoy people. I like to shake people's hands. I like to pat people on the back. I like to, you know, conversate with people. Yeah. And so that's a big part of what we do. And not only from the fan perspective, but from the sponsor perspective. You know, our sport I rely heavily on sponsorship to race. I think any, major sports team, they're going to play whether they have, signage on the outfield, wall, or it doesn't really matter as much to the player. But for us, the driver, we solely depend on millions of dollars of sponsorship to race. And so because of that, we do a tremendous amount of, business meetings with executives from corporate companies to show them a good time and to lure them into showing them why they should sponsor a NASCAR, but then also the ones that are sponsoring, we show them a good time at the event. And so part of that is for me to go meet and greet with their, their salespeople or people that buy from them or the executives. And I love that. That's a very integral part of what we do. And it's something that I really enjoy. And to have that not be a part of what we do on a race day morning was so awkward and out of the norm. But on top of that, it honestly created some loneliness. Sitting at the racetrack, isolated. I wasn't allowed to be around my crew members. I wasn't allowed to be around anybody. I had to be by myself in my motorhome at the racetrack, and all the way until 10 minutes before the start of the race. And then I would walk out with all my gear, go strap into my race car and go race without really coming into contact with anybody. And so for me, that was very awkward, but also just very lonely. And doing that week after week after week, it almost kind of beats you down to where you want to give somebody a hug. You want to shake somebody's hand. You want to, be in that personal relationship with your crew guys and stuff like that. And I miss that the most.
That personal relationship with people is important. Your personal relationship with the Lord is also important. I know when the pandemic hit, you documented so well your crazy life on Instagram, and you do that anyways. And I love following you on Instagram. It's a lot of fun to watch you kind of document your life. But you posted on social media. This is going back to, I think it was March, right when the pandemic hit. And it was just, you called it a moment of quiet reflection, did a little devotional on Philippians 4, 6, and 7. And that kind of leads me into intersecting this conversation with faith, which we talk about a lot here on the show. And we talk about people's walks with their Lord. So tell us about your walk, especially 2020, and maybe how it grew, how it was challenged, how it was tested. Because I know a lot of us, we've all had to kind of do some self-reflection here in our relationship with God. What was this year like, this past year for you from a spiritual perspective?
Yeah, I would say I grew quite a bit this year, just because, when things are out of your control, you have two choices: to either feel out of control or to realize that you're always out of control and that there's only one person in control. And so, for me, that was where I came to this year, was just, like I said, in March, not knowing all the unexpected, all the different things, and, going back to Philippians 4, and it's do not worry. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. And so, that was eye-opening for me. And my walk has been a long, long journey. I grew up in a family where we went to church on Sunday just because it was the right thing to do, but never really had a real deep, personal relationship. And it wasn't until really I got heavily, into my professional career, and really just started to get to a point to where it was like I have everything I ever dreamed of, right? I'm a professional race car driver. I dreamed about that since I was a kid. I have a beautiful wife. I have two beautiful, healthy kids. I live in a nice home. I've got money. I've got, everything I could have ever dreamed of. And still I, oftentimes found myself unsatisfied and unfulfilled. And I remember thinking to myself, what is going on? What is wrong with you? How can you be so uncontent? And at that time, I just started digging deep and reaching out to people that I trusted and people that I had relationships with, that I knew that they were in a personal relationship with Jesus, and they had so much more joy than I had. And most of them, with perceivably what the world sees as less, right? I had way more stuff and things than they did, but they had more joy than I had. And so through those conversations, I picked up my Bible again and started reading it and started my walk, a real journey with Christ. And just, man, that's changed everything for me, because for so long, and I think that all athletes are this way, we correlate who we are as people with results. We're so result driven. We're very type A. We all have, goals, and we set these goals, and we grow up that way our whole lives because you're competitive. And so to do that in everyday life is so damaging. You do it as an athlete, and it's good because it drives you and it motivates you. But when you do that to yourself as a human, it just tears you apart, because you never measure up to what you're supposed to be, and you always want more, and you find yourself unsatisfied and discontent. And so for me, I as I walked, with the Lord and started daily reading again, I realized that all I really needed was grace. It was simple. It all the other stuff didn't matter, and I was always going to fall short. I'm a human being. I mess up. I sin. I'm far from perfect. So the results don't matter. And everything here is temporary. And when I started seeing everything that way, it changed everything for me.
A quick break to tell you about our new partners and sponsors today, Convoy of Hope, a faith-based nonprofit organization with a driving passion to feed the world through children's feeding initiatives, community outreaches, and disaster responses. And right now in the U.S. and throughout the world, countless families are living on the fringe or have fallen into the depths of poverty and suffering. But you can make a difference. And right now, we need you to join the starting lineup with Convoy of Hope and join your favorite players and teams in partnering with Convoy of Hope to fight hunger, poverty, and suffering in the United States and throughout the world. And in doing so, you can advocate, give, network, and volunteer to help ensure that those in need receive hot meals, groceries, haircuts, health and dental screenings, hygiene kits, shoes, clothing, family portraits, and much more. You can learn more right now and be a part of the great work Convoy of Hope is doing by visiting them at their website, convoynation.com. You can donate, you can pray, and be a part of all that Convoy of Hope is doing by, again, checking out that website, convoynation.com, CONVOY nation.com. We're also presented today by our friends at Ronald Blue Trust. Their advisors applying biblical wisdom and technical expertise to help clients make wise financial decisions to experience clarity and confidence and leave a lasting legacy. We all have questions about our finances. Where do we go? What do we invest in? How much do we spend? How much do we save? Ronald Blue Trust has all of those answers. They offer comprehensive financial services and objective advice to over 9,500 clients across the wealth spectrum in all 50 states. You can reach them at ronblue.com. That's their website, ronblue.com. Tell them Sports Spectrum sent you. Ronald Blue Trust. You can trust them. We trust them. Check them out. Biblical Principles, Wealth Management Strategies, ronblue.com. Aric Almirola is our guest here on Sports Spectrum, the NASCAR Cup Series driver, driving the number 10 car with Stewart-Haas Racing. And we got the Daytona 500 coming up February 14th. I want to ask you about the Daytona 500 in just a second. But for you, you just mentioned the results side of the work that you do. And you're judged, if you want to call it that. You're graded by your results and how you do. And your faith, it's completely the opposite. How do you balance those two and be in a world of NASCAR and in a world of athletics where you are judged by how you finish and you want to do well for your sponsors, for your teammates, for your crew, which you guys put all this work in to be the best that you can be. And yet that faith, it doesn't matter about being the best that you can be, although you want to. What I mean by that is what you explained about salvation and about grace. So how do you balance those two?
It's really hard. and I struggle with it, I would say, weekly. And for me, when I run good, then, that from that standpoint, everything's good, right? Like when I finish good, when I win, when I run top 5, life is good and my walk is good. And then when I run bad, I'm like, I suck. Like, what am I doing? How are we going to get better? And you can find yourself, just on this vicious roller coaster, and it happens still today. But, I would say the balance is the tricky part. Just trying to find that balance of being uber competitive and aggressive and, fearless. And you have to have that, like, I'm going to kill everybody attitude. You have you have to have an ego, and you have to be confident. But then on the flip side of it, you have to have, from the Christian aspect, you have to have peace, and you have to have humility, and you can't, there's confidence, but then there's egotistical and prideful. And that balance for me has always been really the struggle. Because most people think when you're a Christian and you're soft-spoken and you're humble, that you are weak. They associate that with weakness or meekness. And that's not the case. I can assure you. And for me, if anything, over the years, it's made me stronger, because I know that I don't care about other people's opinion. I only care about God's opinion. I don't care about a lot of other things, worldly things. What I care about the most is my relationship with the Lord and my family. And so I can block out a lot of those external factors. And for me, it makes me a lot stronger.
As I mentioned, the Daytona 500 coming up February 14th, and you've raced in quite a few of those races, the Super Bowl of NASCAR. Do you remember your first Daytona 500? Do you have a memory from that?
Yeah, I would say. So are you asking about my first Daytona 500 as a fan when I went and watched, or the
Sure.
first one?
I mean, I was thinking driving, but if you have a better memory as a fan, go for it.
So I grew up in Tampa, Florida, and Daytona is only a couple hours away. So we would travel over there and go watch the Daytona 500 and the Firecracker 400, which is the Daytona race in July, all the time when I was a kid, because I was a huge fan. And so I think one of the very first Daytona 500s that I went to go watch, I was maybe 8-9 years old. And I just remember being blown away at the spectacle. The amount of fans, the amount of just busyness and bright colors and all the sponsors and, Fortune 500 companies everywhere and just all the stuff. And I just remember feeling like I was in heaven, like just because I'm such a big race fan, and going to sit in the stands and hearing the roar of the engines and smelling the fuel and the burnt tire rubber. It was just an incredible experience. And from that moment, I was hooked. I grew up around racing. My family's always been in racing, but I had never seen it on that stage. Going to a local short track and watching races with maybe, 1,000 fans in the stands. That's great. It's like going to a youth baseball game, right?
Sure.
But then go to a World Series game, and that electricity of just people waving flags and cheering and hollering is just an incredible event. And so for me, that was something that really had me hooked. And from that day forward, I dreamed about being, in NASCAR and driving a race car for a living.
And then to actually race in the Daytona 500 has to be, this ridiculous moment in a good way, obviously, to where you're like, look at this. This is being 10-year-old Aric and going to watching and then being in the race. And you finished fourth, I think, was your best finish in 2017. So take me to a moment on the track, or even just as a driver preparing or being in the middle of that race, and what stands out, maybe a story you could share.
Well, it's an incredible event, like I said, and now they've added on to Daytona, and it's a world-class stadium. I think it holds about 150,000 And with the amount of people that, camp outside and come inside, we have over 200,000 fans show up for the Daytona 500 yearly. And it's an incredible event. So when you walk out on the driver introduction stage pre-race, they've got smoke and fireworks and all kinds of stuff going on. There's fans all over the infield, and the stands are packed. And it's just an incredibly exciting and energy filled moment. And for me, my very first one, I was so nervous. I felt like I wanted to throw up for hours before the race. And then once you strap in the car and you start the engine up and you roll off pit road to go get ready for the race, all of that stops. It goes away. For me, I become incredibly focused on just doing my job, driving the race car. And the nice thing about being a race car driver is that you can't see the fans and you can't even hear them. The roar of the engine is so loud when you're inside the race car and your focus is on the racetrack and your competitors around you, that you can't hear them or see them. And that's so different than every other sport, right? Every other sport, baseball, basketball, football, like the fans are a very big part of the event. You can hear them cheer, you can hear them boo, you can hear them heckle you. But for our sport, you can't hear any of that once the race starts. And so that was interesting for me, just all the nervousness and the butterflies in the stomach and all those things. But then to get completely calm and focused for the biggest race of the year right before it starts is just an incredible feeling.
That's cool. The Daytona 500 is coming up February 14th. Can't wait to watch it. Can't wait to see Aric Almirola, who is our guest here today on Sports Spectrum. As we wind down, I want to ask you, how do you stay connected to the Lord in a very long race car season, a NASCAR season, like you said very early on here, that starts February and goes all the way to Thanksgiving? That's a long time. You're in a motor home and you're got a lot of different things going on, maybe pre-COVID and then COVID. How do you stay connected? Do you have disciplines? Do you have people in your life that are speaking to you, chaplains? Are you reading God's word every day in sort of a Bible plan? What's that look like for you?
Yeah, so it's all of the above for me, and I stay so busy, and I think my mom and my wife would agree. I have probably a little bit of attention deficit disorder, so it takes a lot of people to keep me on task and to keep me on a daily walk. And I would say a large part of that is an outreach program that follows us around with our racing schedule. It's called Motor Racing Outreach, and we have a couple chaplains with Motor Racing Outreach, and then we have several drivers that participate. And so this year we did a Bible study, and it lasted almost the entire season. It was called Every Man a Warrior. And it was intense. There was a lot of reading and a lot of studying and a lot of time to shift the focus inward and think about, your own self. And it was intense. But for the most part, my wife is a devout Christian. And so, that's a very big topic of discussion in our home and at bedtime when we're tucking our kids in and all of those things. And then, every morning when I wake up, just trying to have 5 or 10 minutes of quiet time before, the kids come downstairs and we're getting ready for school. And then, just having people hold me accountable, having friends in my life that are also on the same walk. And, it says in the Bible that, a cord of 3 strands is way stronger than one, right? And that iron sharpens iron. And so having those relationships with other people that hold me accountable, that ask how I'm doing, ask how my walk is going, it is an absolute necessity for me to stay on track.
He is Aric Almirola. We have the Daytona 500, as I mentioned, coming up February 14th, and a great season hopefully planned here. We don't know what it's going to fully look like still with COVID out there, but hopefully by the middle, maybe even by the end of the year, we're back to where we were pre-COVID with fans and with everything going on. Maybe it'll look a little different, but just excited for the 2021 NASCAR season and excited for you, Aric Almirola. Thank you for joining us here on the show. Really appreciate it, and all the best to you, and hopefully we'll have you back on again soon.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. I appreciate you having me on. It was great. And I look forward to maybe emulating you one day. I love talking about faith and sports. I'm a huge sports fan. So maybe you'll spend some time with me teaching me about the whole podcast world. I'd love to do it. I have some people that I would thoroughly enjoy interviewing and asking them some questions about their faith and their sports.
I love it. Thanks, Aric.
Thanks, buddy.
And many thanks to Aric Almirola for joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. Make sure you search him on Instagram. He's a fun follow there. His last name is spelled Almirola. Aric Almirola, the NASCAR Cup Series driver. Again, the Daytona 500 kicking off on Sunday, February 14th. Make sure you tune in. The Super Bowl of NASCAR, and lots of good stuff there happening with NASCAR and Aric Almirola. Thanks to Aric for joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. We also want to thank you for listening. Thank our sponsors, Ronald Blue Trust. Check them out at ronblue.com for all of your financial needs and concerns, wealth management strategies, and trust services based on biblical principles. That is Ronald Blue Trust. You can check them out at ronblue.com. Also, thanks again to our new friends, our new sponsors, Convoy of Hope, a faith-based nonprofit organization with a driving passion to feed the world through children's feeding initiatives, community outreaches, and disaster response. Check them out at convoynation.com. We're so excited to have them on board here with us at Sports Spectrum. Convoynation.com, Convoy of Hope. Also, make sure you check out our website, sportspectrum.com, for all of our content. And do us one favor, if you could, with this podcast. Rate, review, and subscribe. That's what helps get the word out about this show. So if you could rate and review this podcast on the Apple Podcast app, that will be amazing. And then click that subscribe button on whatever app you're listening to this podcast on, so that you never missed an episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. My name is Jason. We love you guys. We'll see you next time right here on the show. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Tune in to the Daytona 500 on Sunday, and we'll see you next time.